Man of sorrows, right? Man of great sorrow. Okay, yes, we'll stop there. And so, yeah, that's what he's singing, Man of Great Sorrows. And I almost, sitting down there, as I knew what was coming up next, I thought, man, that was so awesome. I don't even want to have them sing Man of Sorrow, right? And so he didn't. Okay, he didn't, you know. So anyway, that's what it was. Well, good morning, church family. And wasn't that awesome this morning? Great worship this morning. So we're in this series of messages out of the book of Philippians entitled Seeing Through the Lens of Jesus. And today we're going to talk about how to do that in the midst of sorrows and struggles. And here's the reality. We in this life all at some point have had sorrows and struggles. I mean, don't we? At some point, most of us have. And we do all have sorrows and struggles. And while they may look different, we all have them, okay? And to kind of make this point this morning, what I'd like to do is this thing I see people do on Facebook. Like, have you ever just, see someone post an inventory, say, of what states you visited in the United States, and you kind of go through it, and you kind of, in your mind or with a piece of paper, check out how many states you've been to, and then at the bottom, they want you to post, and so people will post, like, I've been to 18 states, I've been to 24 states, however many states they've been to. Folks do this with all kinds of other interesting lists. Like not long ago, I'm going to say within the last 2 weeks, somebody posted an inventory of pictures of old things. Like there was a picture of a rotary phone. And it said, did you have one of these? Okay, did you see this? Was it someone here that posted that? Okay, anyway, rotary, I'm like, yeah, check, got one. A picture of a Polaroid Instamatic camera. I'm like, oh yeah, we had one of those. A cassette tape deck. Remember those? Okay, yeah, had one of those. And there's like 100 pictures of things from years going by that you kind of check off in your mind. And at the end, it says, total up your checks and report on Facebook the number of checks. And I didn't get through the whole thing, but anyway, that was kind of fun. So I thought, some of these are kind of fun. So I thought, well, we could do the same thing with our sorrows and struggles, so what I did was I went to Google, the world's wisdom, and I Googled 100 common struggles, okay? And what I received back, the one that caught my attention was one entitled Regeneration, whose theme was, it actually came from a Bible verse, 1 Corinthians 10:13, which reads, no temptation has overtaken you that's not common to man. Like, this goes around a lot, right? And so I pulled that one up, and so I thought, well, what we could do this morning is I'll just read through some of these. I mean, it gives me 100 plus struggles and sorrows that we deal with, and so I thought we can go through a few of these. And what I want to do is just in your own mind, just like in your own mind, okay, not someone else's mind, just yours, okay, do a mental check if you struggled at some point in your life with this particular one. And don't help out the person beside you. Don't go, hey, that's one of yours. Okay, none of that. But we're just going to go through a few of these. We're not going to go through 100 plus, okay, because it'd be too long. But they're in alphabetical order. Okay, so first up, under the A, is abandonment. And so what you would do is have I ever struggled with abandonment? And if so, check, okay. Abortion, abuse in any form, alcohol, anger or anxiety, anorexia, apathy, or arrogance. Any of those A's, just check, whatever. Under the B's, have you ever struggled with binging, boasting, or bragging, body image, or bulimia? Okay, under the C's, have you ever struggled with cheating, child pornography, codependency, coveting, a critical spirit, or complaining, or cutting, which they're talking about the self-harm cutting, okay? And under the D's, have you ever struggled with debt, depression, divorce, drugs, drunkenness, or any form of substance abuse? And I'm going to stop right there, okay, because I'm going to guess you got a check by now, okay? And I don't know about you or anyone else, but I actually went through the 100 plus list. It was very depressing because I was like, check. I had forgotten about a lot of this stuff that I'd gone through once upon a time or a family member had gone through. And truth is, at some point or on several points, we all struggle, don't we, church? Yes, we do. Okay, and one of the things I want to kind of lean in today and unpack today is some of us have a list, and some of the things are kind of cute on that list, or at least we describe them. Like some of the things I checked off, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that now. When I was younger and stupid, instead of older and stupid. I remember when that happened, okay? But most of us, if we're being brutally honest, there were a lot more of those struggles when you think on them. Many of those struggles or seasons of struggles were not cute. And they were very real, right? And often it wasn't just one thing. Sometimes it was like a 50-car pileup, it's a real disaster, and all that weight is on your shoulders. And I'm just telling you, there have been seasons, and I know this has been true in my life, where it's just felt like there's a million things on my chest. And yes, I'm struggling with doubt, and I'm struggling with fear, and I'm struggling with trying to be a good husband and a good granddad and a good preacher and a good, whatever. And anytime several of those struggles kind of line up together, and once in a while they do, the weight of that gets real heavy, right? Have you ever? Yeah, it gets real heavy. And for you, it might be different than it is for me. Your seasons may be different because people's sorrows and struggles are different. We struggle with addictions. We struggle with our past. We struggle with the future. We struggle with our kids and our marriages. We struggle with how to navigate life and how to not feel all alone. And sometimes it just we struggle with getting overwhelmed by it all, And so here's what I want to do. I just want to have a real church family conversation kind of where we talk about what do we do with our sorrows and our struggles, okay? And what do we do with those things that we struggle with that bring us and those around us so much sorrow? How do we get through them? Sometimes it separates us. How do we get through them? Or perhaps more importantly, how do we remain faithful through them in the midst of them? So here's what I'd like us to do to start off this week. Because last week we talked about, if you'll remember, Philippians chapter, the first 11 verses, but verse 6 was our key verse. And it was all about building confidence in the fact that what? God's not, okay, 3 people got last week's. Okay, let me give you another chance. God's not done. There it is. Okay, that God's not done. And He began a good work in us. It's a process. It won't necessarily be complete until Jesus comes again. This week, kind of in the same light of all that, with a slightly different bent, I'd like to start us with another passage of Scripture written by the same Apostle Paul. And this passage is found in Romans 8:28, which is a pretty familiar passage. You perhaps know this passage. It says this. It says, "And we know," did you catch that? It's not like we guess or we hope. It says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him and who have been called according to His purpose." And so here's what I want to do today, and here's why we're going to go. We're going to ask this question, and the question is this: Is it possible that the God who loves us and the God who has His plans and purposes for us, is it possible today that He also wants to meet us in our sorrows and struggles and even work them out for our good? Okay? So, where we left off last week as we look at this new perspective by seeing through the lens of Jesus was around the middle of the first chapter of Philippians. I think we finished up with verse 11. And so today we're going to pick up where we left off with Philippians chapter 1, and we're going to look at just 3 verses 12 through 14. So if you haven't turned there, please do. So you get your Bible apps out or your Bibles out. We're going to kind of walk through these 3 verses together and maybe a few others. But so we're just going to also take a look at the apostle's life. And when I say the apostle's life, I'm talking about the Apostle Paul's life. We did a little bit last week. We're going to do more this week. And so we're going to take a look at it through his letter to his friends, the Philippians, a church, as we mentioned last week, that he planted. There were no Christians there when he first came. He planted that church like a decade before this. So we're going to go back there to the Philippians. So just as a refresher, I kind of want to catch you up on where we first met the Philippians, okay? Where Paul first met the Philippians, okay? But we looked at it last week. And as you know, if you want to understand the Bible, this is the context, and we want to know the context because context is what, church family? It's the king, yeah. So now this is in Acts chapter 16. You can look there if you want, but I'm going to go really fast. Read it this afternoon. It'll still be there. But anyway, there's this vision. Paul has this vision of a man in Macedonia, somebody in Europe, and this man in the vision was saying to Paul in his vision, "Come over and help us." Okay, and so Paul recognized that it was time to take the gospel to Europe for the very first time. This is like a decade before. And so Paul goes across with his friend Silas, and the first town they walk into is the town of Philippi. Okay, now, back then in Philippi, they walked through the whole town, and as they walk through the whole town, they can't find a single believer. Not one. No, not one. So then they're like, okay, well, we'll go to the Jewish believers. And so they look for believers among the Jewish, and they can't find one. So they go outside and they go to a river. And at that river, they meet a woman named, anybody? Lydia, yeah. And Lydia and a handful of women are having a prayer meeting out there. And immediately, right from the banks of that river, as soon as Paul shares the gospel, just like that, she accepts Christ. Okay? And so Lydia is the first European believer. And she says, you've got to come to my house, like right now. Okay? And so Lydia invites Paul over to her house. And at that house, they just start reaching out to all kinds of people. It's like a super fertile ground there at Lydia's house. And because, like, literally right on the spot, people are just giving their lives over to Christ. And it's amazing, and it's beautiful, and it's powerful. Okay? So after that, Paul and Silas start walking the streets again, trying to meet some new people, and in the middle of walking down the streets, they run into this slave girl, okay? And I don't know if you remember this, but it's in Acts chapter 16, but they run into this slave girl, and they recognize that she can tell the future. And I remember I actually wrote a paper on this in Bible college 100 years ago. And if you have, I checked this week, and some of the New Study Bibles, you might find some of this in there under Acts 16:16 and how it's connected to the great Delphi Oracle. And if you don't know what that is, you can Google that and find all about the Delphi Oracle. But I wrote on and this girl was part of that. Anyway, she can tell the future. And Paul discerns the reason that she can tell the future is she's possessed by a python spirit. Okay, which sounds like she's from Florida or something. I don't know. Okay, but a python spirit does not sound good. Now, we would just normally say demon, and your Bible may say demon or spirit, but if you look, it has a little letter behind it, and if you look in the notes, it'll say python spirit, okay? So anyway, she has a python spirit. So Paul just, in a spirit of compassion, sees this slave girl not only as a slave physically, but she's a slave spiritually, and he casts this demon out of this girl, and so this girl gets free from this evil spirit. Now, you'd say, yay! Good, right? Okay, but it causes such a stir that it causes Paul and Silas to be locked up in prison, meaning the slave owners who were making money off her telling the future can't make any money anymore, so they get all, anyway, Paul and Silas are now in prison, and Paul and Silas in prison, and you're thinking for doing good, we didn't see that one coming, but they're there, sitting in prison, and just as a refresher, if you and I were in prison, we talked about this last week, our perspective of being in a prison cell would be what? Like, get me out of here, right? I want my one phone call, someone post my bond so I can get out of here. Get me out of here now. That would normally be our perspective. But we learned last week, not Paul. Paul and Silas, no. The perspective on that prison cell, it's a little bit different because it's about midnight, and what they're doing is they're singing hymns and praising God. It's only a few hours, like 4 hours later, that they've been put there, and they just said, hey, we're here, let's just start worshiping, And so about midnight, they just start worshiping God. And all these prisoners are listening, and all of a sudden, in the middle of their worship, an earthquake hits, the prison doors pop open, and you remember this, all of a sudden, they're like, what? This is kind of crazy. They're like the Philippian jailer comes running in, right? And all the doors are open, and the jailer's thinking, I'm going to lose my life. Right. Well, the reason he thinks he's going to lose his life is that's the way it works. Okay. When you're the prison guard, you lose the prisoners, you pay with your own life. So, hey, good news. Amazing, crazy news, actually, because the prisoners, they don't run. They all stay. And it wasn't just Paul and Silas. That's all of them, because every single prisoner there was just in all of what God was doing. And right there, everybody comes to Christ. The jailer comes to Christ. His whole household comes to Christ. And the next morning, they let Paul and Silas out of prison, and they head on their way out of town, but they stop by Lydia's house, okay, and they throw a little party before they leave, and then it's on to the next gospel crusade, the next explosion of Jesus' church, right? Now, I know that's a lot in a short amount of time, okay, and that's kind of like Mark's summary, but you can read it. It's all right there in Acts chapter 16. But here's why I shared all that. It's because you read all that, and your perspective probably would be, oh, that's pretty awesome stuff. Sign me up, right? Sign me up for some of that. I'm sure it's a little scary. Girl possessed with some demon that sounds like a python snake, angry businessmen who want to throw you in jail. But in the end, let's kind of look at the story there. Paul had a vision, so he went. And when he got there, people accepted Christ on like the first night of the revival. Demons are being cast out. Worship services are breaking out in jail cells. People's lives are being transformed. And man alive, that's a spiritual mountaintop. You're going like, woo, it's happening, man, right? Sign me up. I'm all in, right? But I'd like to contrast all of that with this now that's happening to Paul 10 years later. I just want to make sure that you know that the Philippians chapter 1 Paul is about Paul 10 years later based on this letter. So now they're going to catch up on Paul a decade later. This is the Philippians. They got a letter. They're going to catch up on Paul a decade later. Now, but he's not blowing through town spearheading the local revivals, and he's not facing down demons, and he's not watching prison cells open, not even the one that he's currently in. Right? And as a matter of fact, his circumstances are not what any of us would choose, right? As he has been imprisoned, he's confined in a cell, he's chained to a prison guard, this time for 4 hours. Well, 4 hours came and 4 hours went, and he's still in prison, and then the next 4 hours, and then the next 4 days, and then the next a month after that. And so they're finding Paul in a spot where most of them can't imagine finding Paul in. He's stuck in prison. As a matter of fact, it's even worse than that because they're hearing from across the sea. Like he also had all these other people that were doing gospel stuff, and they were preaching the gospel, and even a group of people, that they would just hear about all these cities that were being transformed under Paul's leadership, okay? But as soon as Paul gets locked up, all these other preachers and pastors and leaders, they start going into those territories like on this weird power grab. Okay, and they're preaching their own gospel message, which is kind of bent towards this thing that's more about them than it is about Jesus. Okay, and many of his friends, Paul's church family friends, they're saying bad things about, and they're hearing some of those things, so they just totally leave Paul. Okay, so when the people in the church of Philippi open this letter from their friend, this is the context, that when they get this letter from their friend and Pastor Paul, they have some questions about what kind of man is going to be sitting behind the pen who's going to be writing this letter to them. What's he going to be writing about? This guy is literally buried beneath the rubble of his sorrows and struggles, one would think, right? These are crippling circumstances. What's he going to say? So we talked about this a little bit last week, but from our perspective of a jail cell and how Paul's perspective of the jail cell was different than ours, I would submit to you that the people of Philippi are more like us than Paul, okay? So when they open this letter from Paul, I think there's a good chance that they were expecting this to be a letter that speaks of a man of great sorrow and struggle. And as soon as they open it up, I think instantly they find a guy that they didn't think they were going to find, because instantly they find a guy who's just like full speed ahead, smile on his face, joy in his heart, and he's just saying, hey, it's so good to hear about what's going on in your lives. Let me tell you what God has done for me. Let me speak some courage into you. And he just comes busting out of the gate, and it sounds not at all like the guy they thought they were going to find in this letter. Case in point. Check this out. Philippians chapter 1, verse 12, it says this. He says, this is Paul. He says, and please listen carefully to what Paul says. He says, now I want you to know, brothers, sisters, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. Like things are happening, right, to advance the gospel. That's pretty cool. He says, listen, I know what most of you are probably thinking. You're thinking Paul's down on his luck. You're thinking his friends have left him. He's going to be sad. He's going to be bummed out about his circumstance. But they open this letter to find Paul, and Paul is like confident, okay? Paul's at peace. Paul's literally writing, really, he's in the middle of writing some of what some people would say are the three most powerful letters in the New Testament at this time. He writes, while he's there in his prison cell, during this exact time, he's going to write the book of Colossians, which our ladies are doing a study on starting this week. But the book of Colossians is literally the best book on the supremacy of Christ above all things. Okay? Didn't steal your thunder there, did I? Sorry, anyway, it'll be better there. Okay, and Paul is just sitting there writing a letter about how amazing Christ is and how he's above all things. And then he starts writing the book of Ephesians, or the letter of Ephesians, and it's the most articulate book on who you are in Christ Jesus, and what you've been given in Christ. And then he's writing this book of Philippians, which is literally the best perspective-changing book in the entire New Testament. So Paul sits there as they open this letter, and Paul just says to them, I need you to know I'm doing super great. Okay, I'm doing super great, guys, because of Christ in me. I am not a man of sorrow, okay? And because I am not a product of my circumstances or my struggles, so they don't bother me, he's saying. This stuff doesn't bother me. In fact, I'm totally at peace. I'm all good. And if you want to know, there's something that God has been doing in me that I wish to share with all of you. And I don't know about you, but I'm saying I want some of that, right? I mean, how inspiring is that? So, that's the introduction. So that's what we're hoping to talk about here today on this Fine Lord's Day morning. So we hear these inspiring words of Paul, and we take a look into Paul's life, and that is to be inspired onto a new perspective, because honestly, so many people are struggling and will struggle and have struggled. And if you haven't struggled in the past or present, just live a little longer. It's coming. Right? It's coming, okay? But for those who are in the midst of sorrows and struggles right now, the word of the Lord for you this morning is that in the midst of our sorrows and struggles, here's what we can find. Here's what we can lean into. Here's what we can find out about God through the lens of Jesus, and that is that we too can navigate those places that are so dark and sometimes so scary, but we can walk out of them just like Paul, okay, who walked out stronger, more confident, more peace-filled, and focused than you can ever imagine. It's there for us in Jesus. Okay, so I've got 3 things, and I'm going to try to keep these short because I know the intro was long, okay, but I wouldn't bank on it. But anyway, we'll see. Okay, so this text in the book of Philippians, we don't really get to hear him talk about why he's doing well as he's doing. But if you go back to the book of Romans, he does. Okay, and I just want to look at one verse in Romans chapter 5, verse 3, very quickly. You probably already know this passage anyway, but Paul says, "Listen, we also glory in all our sufferings." Really? Like, how do you do that? Okay. He says, we also glory. Like, everybody glories in the good times, right? The victory. So he goes, we also glory in our sufferings, okay? Now, in our natural way of thinking about things, that sounds crazy. It's like, everyone give me a high five because I'm suffering. We're going like, what's up with that, right? Did you fall down and hit your head, Paul? But we'd be like, why? Why would Paul say a thing like that? Well, Paul gives us the answer as to why when he says, because we know. Well, what is it did you know? Paul says, because we know, because we've become convinced that suffering produces perseverance, and that perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. Paul says, listen, my friends, I've got a little insight now that I've been following Jesus for a while, and I want you to know that there's something really important about suffering, and it involves a whole new perspective about weight. Okay, and about what this weight is going to do in you. And I want to lead you to a place where you're strong, and I want to lead you to a place where you also have hope. And so Paul lays out this whole chain of sequences where suffering leads to perseverance, perseverance leads to character, and character leads to hope. Now, how's that work in real life? Okay, those are great words and very inspiring, but how's that work? Well, you have to kind of dig a little deeper, and in the original language, the word for suffering in those verses carries this concept of weight. Okay, or more importantly, a weight that presses or pushes together. Okay, if you've ever experienced significant sorrow and struggle, you would understand extreme pressure, right? That's what it's talking about, extreme pressure. So picture this. This is where the word comes from. Picture the olive harvest in Israel. They got a bunch of olive trees over there. So picture that harvest, and they basically, they take those olives and they put them in baskets, and and then they get ready to get something very valuable out of it. What do they get out of their olives? Anybody know? Very valuable. Olive oil, yeah. Okay, so this is how they do it. They put these olives in baskets, and then they would stack those olives up, and then they would get this massive, several ton stones, and they would begin to lower that weight on top of these olives. So what kind of chance does that olive have, by the way? Not good. It's going to get crushed, right? And I mean, that's what would happen. And the word is Phillipians, which is the Greek word for suffering, but there would be such a weight on these olives and such pressure on them that they would literally be smashed and ground and pulverized. It pulverizes everything. And then something beautiful and valuable comes out of all that. Right? Does that make sense? So the new perspective, the Jesus perspective on suffering is that when the weight is so heavy that everything else gets smashed and pulverized around you, it's only then that something beautiful is going to come out. Now, you may not know this or see it from where you're sitting today, but I work out 3 mornings a week. And it's hard to see, I know. And but Margie and I we both do, and so do and a couple other families in this church. But one of the things I do is part of my workout 3 mornings a week is I lift weights. And this one time, early on, I was trying to get up to my max weight, and then you move up rather quickly when you haven't been working out, and then all of a sudden, it's like losing weight. You hit those plateaus, and then you start moving up 5 pounds at a time. So how I do weights is the way I was told is I was gonna lift weights with my legs. Okay, that's one of my best ones is my legs, and so I have a max weight, and I wanted to increase it. And how they teach you to do it is when you're gonna increase, just go 5 pounds at a time. Okay, don't add 50 pounds on. So the way I do it is I set the weight much lower than what I'm going to lift, and you do a couple sets, to warm up your body parts so they're warmed up and ready for what you're going to do. And so then I went to move it up to my max weight, and I got confused. I thought I was raising it 5 pounds, but I actually raised it 110 pounds. Just one time, mind you. I've only ever done this once. But anyway, I raised it what I thought was 5 pounds, but I actually raised it 110 pounds, and I got into position thinking, I got this, okay? It's only 5 pounds, Mark. I got this, okay? And I got my mind kind of locked in, and I hit that weight, and real quick I realized, I don't got this, okay? I don't got this, okay? And then afterwards, I had to do a total body check to see if anything was broke, okay? Which I didn't discover until the next day. That's how that works. But anyway, many of you in the room understand that because you've experienced this in life, okay? Like there are so many times in life, when we don't understand that the weight's got us and not the other way around. And honestly, there's so many people in life that are like, I got this. Like you D-type people, the in-charge people, managers and businessmen, I got this. People like me, C-type people who think they got it all figured out. I got this. But when the extreme weight comes, you know what most of us find out? We don't got this. Okay? And in the kingdom, Paul says, you don't understand how important that is. To know that you don't got this and you need him. And there's something very valuable that he wants to produce in you and he wants to do in you. And so I think Paul would have us all see, and if you're a note taker here, it finally comes that first point, that the struggle is an opportunity for God to grow something valuable and powerful inside of you. Okay, something valuable and powerful inside of you. And we're going to jump right into the second thing. I think Paul would also say your struggle is an opportunity for others to see God clearly. Okay? Philippians 1, verse 13, it says it like this. Paul says it like this. He says, as a result, okay, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. It has become clear, he says, who I'm working for. Right? Okay, Paul says, you know what? What's really strange is that you would think that me being imprisoned, chained and imprisoned, would make the gospel kind of confusing. Right? I mean, I don't know about the gospel, I don't know about the gospel you heard when you were younger. Okay, we talked about a little about this in study group this morning about when we learned about Gideon, he's a hero. We didn't hear all about Gideon's shortcomings, that he's flawed and he's really a coward. And so we don't hear that, okay? And the Bible stories I always heard was it's kind of like the 10 years before with Paul and Philippi. They experience like these awesome things happen. Like God comes in and the ground shakes and the prison doors open and the chains drop off and this happens and you don't struggle anymore and it's all this amazing kind of stuff. And Paul says, listen, it's the weirdest thing because here I am in chains, and yet here in the midst of my struggles, as all the people that are closest to me see me, the gospel is not more confusing. The gospel is becoming ever more clear. And many of you will get this because you've been there and experienced that kind of grace in your life, okay? But it's like you know what? I might be reading too much into this, but I don't think so. But I look at Paul, and he has all these guards chained to him, and all these brothers are coming to see him, bringing him food and taking care of him. And when you see that, my friends, if you're an observer and you see that, the gospel becomes more clear to you. Okay? And we start to get that the gospel isn't just about health and wealth, and it's not about, the Jesus would make your world all good and blessed and everything. I mean, someone might once said the gospel isn't about helping you with your 2.2 kids and your nice cars and your nice house. That's not what the gospel is about. Now, that may happen, and that's great, and there's nothing wrong with that, and God's not mad about that. He's blessed you with that. But let's be clear. The gospel is when the Spirit of Christ moves into the midst of God's people and things get real and things get gritty and His presence just shows up in powerful ways. I mean, the gospel is what happens when your circumstances aren't perfect, and it's not just perfect people, okay? It's like real people. The people in your life are real people. You're real people with real struggles, with real life, and God somehow, even when the circumstances aren't perfect, would choose. I mean, there's this radiance that's inside of you, this confidence that's inside of you, and this brilliant light that comes because you are a child of the King. I mean, have you ever experienced that gospel, church family? I know it sounds like the craziest thing, but when it happens to you and you experience the gospel message starts to get a whole lot clearer, right? Case in point, years ago, a few years before Margie and I quit our careers, sold everything, and left our families and came on this adventure called vocational ministry, I was working for a major insurance company, had been there probably 15 years at that time, and hard times hit the industry, okay? I mean, really hit. I mean, field reps, sales manager, district managers were all hit hard. Everybody, basically. Many quit their jobs. Quite a few went on mental disability. I remember we had 40 reps and 8 of them at one time were out on mental disability. I mean, it was bad. Times were hard, real hard, okay? I mean, everybody was feeling it. There wasn't anybody exempt. And I remember this one Friday after the district manager had our educational meeting, and he called me into the office. And he says, Mark, evidently I irritated him, and he called me into the office, which is much worse than being called into the principal's office, at least I've been told, and the long and short of this story is, of the meeting was, he was obviously agitated with me, and he accused me of being too happy, too joyful. I didn't really get it. Okay, and he asked, how can you be so happy and so joyful all the time? And I said, I really don't know what you mean. And he said, I've seen your paycheck. Isn't your family suffering? I'm like, yes, sir. Things are really rough. We're barely getting by. He says, how does your family have money? Does your family have money? You got a rich uncle or something? How is it you're so happy all the time? I'm like, no, sir, no family money here, but I just trust we'll be okay or our needs will be provided. And he said, well, exactly how is that going to happen? What do you know that I don't know? And I said, I don't mean to be disrespectful, sir, but we're both Christians, right? And didn't Jesus say He'd never leave us? And didn't Jesus instruct us to pray and ask for our daily needs? And didn't He say if He feeds the birds every day, how much more He loves us? And so I don't know how to explain what you're talking about. I'm just doing my best to do all I can for my family, and I'm just trusting Jesus with the rest. So if I appear too happy, I guess I'm trusting Jesus. And that was the end of the meeting. He was mad when I went in there, but he was no longer mad. He didn't throw me out. He just said, oh, okay, you can go now. I think the gospel got real clear in that moment. It was clear to me. I think it got clear to him too. Now, It's not completely clear what's happening inside of Paul here, but it becomes clear to a lot of people that would start to look at Paul's life and be like, oh man, I hate this for Paul. I mean, I hate that Paul's got all these hard times coming down on him. And then all of a sudden, you fast forward time just a little bit, and this is usually the way it happens in the kingdom of God, by the way, but one minute you're like, man, I feel so sorry for Paul now that he can't travel to all these churches, you know. I mean, think of all the places that are missing out on Paul's teaching and preaching. Think of all the people that don't get to hear the gospel from Paul, you know. But here's the thing. When that's our perspective, isn't that a little bit like thinking God doesn't know what he's doing? Like, why would God keep Paul, from traveling on the road and have it be like people are just watching God do all these amazing things, earthquakes happening, prison doors opening up, amazing things. But God had other plans. Interesting thing, Paul, he being held in prison as he's waiting trial for Caesar. And I don't know if you caught this or not. It says palace guard or imperial guard. I mean, that's a pretty impressive guard, okay, because Paul was awaiting trial for Caesar. So he's got this palace guard, imperial guard guarding him. So literally, Paul is not just chained to some random prison guard. Paul is chained and surrounded by the best bodyguards on planet Earth. Okay? And now think about this, because for the prior 10 years before prison, amidst all that other amazing stuff, Paul tells us, like, he's been pushed off cliffs, he's been stoned, he's been shipwrecked, he's been and done about every single thing that you can imagine. I mean, if it happens, it's happened to Paul. Okay? He's been beaten more than once, and now he's being held over in trial for prison, and most people see his imprisonment and think, man, I can't believe that. Why would God do that to Paul? Why would God allow that to happen to Paul? Why would Paul suffer like that? And yet Paul is having people from all these other places come in and have conversations with him. I mean, some of them are having conversations with the same people that would push him off the cliff, I think. But now he's got bodyguards, okay? And now he's in a spot where he's got the time and the place, and he's writing and spending time. And all of a sudden, it becomes clear to a whole bunch of people, maybe God isn't asleep at the wheel. Maybe God actually knows what he's doing, and it starts becoming clear that your struggle is an opportunity for others to see God clearly. Real quick, third thing. Your struggle is an opportunity to fuel other people's faith. Philippians chapter 1, verse 14, Paul says this. He winds this little section up with this. He says, and because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. He's inspiring others from prison. Okay, here's where the rubber meets the road in the Christian walk. In times of struggle and sorrow, I know that God used Paul's chains so that he could experience the kind of growth deep down that he longed for. And we're talking about growing deeper this year. So I like this, okay? It's kind of, I think he's growing Paul. And I think that's true. He desires that for everybody. But I think he desires this even for the Apostle Paul, okay? I believe God used Paul's chains not just to help and grow Paul, but that God does that to help other people see the gospel more clearly. So yeah, I think he used Paul's chains to help others be more confident and more courageous, okay? And I think he wants to do the same thing for us, in us, and through us, okay? So now, I'm going to close with this. Most of you are aware, I think Clay stood up before you a few weeks ago and shared with you about what's going on in Haiti, and you probably know it anyway. It's not in the news as much as it was, but I think most of you are aware that there is a humanitarian crisis in Haiti where the gangs have taken over control of the country. They have seized the ports. They have shut down the airports. The banks are closed. Most hospitals are closed. Basically, everything's just not happening, okay? It's all shut down. And people are dying from gang violence that now controls the country. Innocent people, including women and children. Starvation has reached the point that mothers are making mud cookies. You heard me right. I said they are making mud cookies out of mud, okay, to feed their children because their children's stomachs feel so empty. And it's not just the people of Haiti, but it's also missions whose stateside resources have been shut off that are feeling the suffering as well, like the one that we support, okay? I'd like to share with you a letter from that mission, as we've collected for them many times in the past. And this is written from the mission leader to stateside prayer warriors, okay? It's dated early March, so just maybe 5 weeks ago, a little over a month ago. And I want you to listen for the things that we talked about today, okay? The sorrow and suffering and the weight that is pressing something incredibly, extremely valuable out of this leader and their people. And I want you to listen for the opportunity that they keep their eyes focused on in the midst of such sorrow and struggles. It reads this way. Today, I write you with tears streaming down my face. Our beloved cook has just passed away from a disease that we could have easily treated a month ago when we could buy medication. We closed our clinic because we must save what little meds we have. The banks are closed. There is no way to wire funds into any part of Haiti as of right now. Even if someone wanted to give us $1 million, there's no way to access it. We have staff people who have not received their February payroll. We have no money to purchase food for the orphans. They are now eating once a day with a plan to eat every other day at the end of this week. Our staff are hungry. Prices of everything has tripled if you can even buy anything, but our depots, and they mean they're like grocery stores, are empty. We have no formula, no peanut butter, or any kind of food. And if it is this hard for our mission, imagine our Haitian villagers and all those across the country. People here are starving now at a much faster rate or dying from easily treatable diseases. It just feels so unfair and so unjust. We are not currently in fear for our safety, just truly terrified for the people that we have here that we love and serve. At this point, there is nothing that anyone can do except pray fervently. Tell me, church, can you hear the weight in this person's voice? The sorrow and the suffering. Here's another, March 22nd, it reads, one of the hardest things we had to do happened today. It just made me want to cry. We had several employees ask if they could have a little sugar and salt and oil so that they could make their own mud cookies to feed their families. Ugh. I can't believe things have gotten so bad that we are now helping them make mud cookies. What in the world? I cannot wrap my mind around this. April 2nd. Dear prayer warriors, I so appreciate your prayers, encouragement, love, and support. This past weekend was tough, especially for me, for it marked the first Easter without our traditional special meal for the sunrise service, which was bread generously covered with peanut butter and a hot chocolate. You know where that peanut butter goes? Sunrise service. Not this year. Last week, we announced there wouldn't be a meal for the Easter weekend. We assumed most people come for the food, so we expected lower church attendance. Surprisingly, we were packed, scrambling to find chairs and benches from all over the campus. We even had orphans and staff sit outside where they could hear but not see the service. We easily had over 450 people. I didn't even want to attend church this Sunday. I felt so ashamed. I didn't want to look anyone in the eye, but in spite of all this, everyone was praising God as if the food didn't matter. But deep down, we all hoped for something to eat. During our prayer time, tears were shed collectively. One last letter, April 10th, just a few days ago. The past few months have been filled with so much sorrow. My pillow is often soaked with tears. It feels like a never-ending journey through the valley of death. I have to constantly remind myself that God is good, even when it doesn't feel good, even when I can't see any good, even when the news I hear is simply not good. But here is a reminder. Simply lacking material wealth does not, all capital letters, does not equate to spiritual poverty. And I, too, cannot wait for the day where millions of Haitian brothers and sisters sing to the King right alongside of us. And then there's a PS of sorts. It reads, on Sunday night, amidst all the darkness, we gathered for a special all-night worship service, and despite the absence of physical light, the presence of His light was undeniable as the Holy Spirit made Himself known in the midst of our sorrow. It was a powerful reminder. In other words, the gospel was made clear. It was a powerful reminder of His unfailing love and grace. You know, friends, we've all seen this, perhaps done this, not what they're going through, but we've all seen, times of sorrow and struggle because the weight people must carry. They often turn to other things to help with the weight. Like some people turn to alcohol or drugs, even though we all know alcohol and drugs will never carry that weight. Some people turn to their external looks and they bank on that, but deep down inside, you know that external looks are never going to carry that weight. Some focus on building a bigger empire, a bigger bank account, and you're like, you know what, I will never be in need again. And I hear you and I love you, but deep down, you know your money in the bank will never carry that kind of weight. Not in your life. For there's only one who can, And he loves you. And he wants to meet you right in the midst of your sorrow and struggles today. There's only one, and his name is Jesus Christ. And all God's people said,